In music production, we're always talking about analog versus digital. If you've ever used analog hardware, you probably agree that analog sounds better than digital in most cases. Especially for things like compressors, I find that analog compressors sound a lot better in most cases than their digital counterparts. Now, of course, you can make a case for how digital workflow is better, especially when recalling things. It's much faster to recall settings in digital than it is in analog. But I think in general, most people that have used analog hardware will agree that analog sounds better, especially for compression. But you'll notice that I keep saying in most cases, and that's because it's not always the case. Sometimes you'll find that a digital version of something will work better in a certain application. So when I'm mixing, I usually like to use an analog compressor on my mix bus, and the one that I use right now isn't even all that expensive. It's an old DBX compressor. Like, you can get this for like $80 on the used market. And even though it's not all that expensive, it sounds really, really good in a lot of cases. But I was working on this track recently and it just wasn't the right fit. So we have this song here, and it's a really light song. It's a really laid back song. And in this particular instance, I didn't like the hardware compressor on the mix bus. I much preferred the digital compressor. So the compressor I ended up using on the actual mix is this SSL bus comp. But for right now, we're going to turn that off and we're going to kick the hardware compressor back on. And I'm going to show you the difference between the two. So here's the track with the analog compressor on the mix bus.
And I can sense it, a quiet exit. You know I never learned to let go of anything.
Now, it certainly doesn't sound bad, and I do like a lot of things about how that sounds on the mix bus here. Especially for the drums, I feel like for drums, you just cannot beat analog compression. What an analog compressor does to a drum sound is something that digital just cannot quite match. But the problem with the analog compressor in this instance is it's a little noisy, it's a little dirty, and for a track that's this quiet, that's this laid back, that little bit of grit is just a little bit too much for the song. I needed a cleaner option for this song. So in this particular instance, I turned off the analog compressor and I used a digital bus comp instead. And listen to how this sounds.
And I can sense it, a quiet exit. You know I never learned to let go of anything.
Now, I'm sure you can see what I mean about the drums especially. It does not sound the same as the analog compressor. The analog compressor just feels a little bit tighter. It gets a little bit more of like a splat sound out of the drums, if that makes sense. Which again, normally on the stuff that I'm working on, I like that a lot because I'm usually working on a lot heavier stuff. But for this particular song, it's so quiet, it's so relaxed, it's so laid back that I needed something cleaner than the analog compressor. So real quick, I'm gonna show them to you back to back again. Here's the hardware compressor.
And I can sense it, a quiet exit. You know I never learned to let go of anything.
And here's the digital compressor.
And I can sense it, a quiet exit. You know I never learned to let go of anything.
Like, it's definitely a different sound. And again, neither of them sound bad. It's just this one is a little bit cleaner. It feels a little bit more open. The hardware compressor was definitely adding just a little bit too much saturation to everything, which again, in most of the stuff that I work on, I really, really like that. But for this particular song, it needed to be cleaner. So that's why I went with the digital compressor in this case. So really, guys, the point I'm trying to make here is don't get too set in your ways. Even if you have analog hardware that you can use, and even if you like using it most of the time, sometimes it might not be the best option. And this isn't even totally limited to analog versus digital. This could also just be the case just in the digital realm. If you mix a lot of stuff and you're always mixing the same way, if you're always reaching for the exact same plugins, sometimes those go-to plugins might not be the best option in a certain situation. So if you're working on something and you have your normal chain brought up and it's not sounding quite right, maybe try to swap something out for something different. Don't get so set in your ways to the point that it prevents you from getting the best result for the song you're working on. So I know in these videos we're really focused on the mixing process, but the root cause of a lot of the problems we run into here are really based in the recording side of things and not in the mixing side of things. The mix is only ever going to be as good as the source recorded tracks allow them to be. If you get a better source recording, the better your mixes will be every single time. And it's for that reason that I put together my home recording cheat sheet. This is a free guide that helps you get better recordings on your own at home. I just updated it for 2025. I added a bunch of helpful diagrams, I added some bonus tips, and I made some changes to some old tips to update them for where things are now. If you want to check that out, you can find a link to it in the description below, and I really hope it's helpful for you.